I put out a survey a few weeks ago and hundreds of you actually answered. So thank you to those of you that did answer this survey, asking you, what do you guys want to know more about? What do you guys want to learn more about? What do you guys want to hear more about? And a very, very, very large majority of you wanted to find out more about the firefighter interview. Everything that has to do with what to expect, how to answer questions, everything about it. So in this video, my aim in this video is to make this the #1 most comprehensive resource for everything related to the firefighter interview. We will cover everything from the very beginning to you just find out that you have an interview scheduled in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, whatever, to the very end. How do you end this? How do you follow up? When do you follow up? What do you do if you don't get the job, right? That's a pretty common thing for a lot of people. And everything in between. We'll be going over questions. It's going to be broken actually into 3 parts. One is everything leading up to the interview. Number 2 is everything in the interview. And then number 3 is everything after the interview. So I apologize ahead of time if this video gets kind of long-winded. Feel free to stop, come back, take notes, do whatever you want to do. But my aim with this video is to make this as comprehensive as possible. The best resource out there for that. A couple more things that I want to go over before we jump right into it. I'm also going, this video is going to end up being a premiere. So if you're watching this as this premieres, ask me, I'm not sure what side it's going to be in. Ask me questions. I will be literally sitting here watching, typing, answering anything that you have questions about. If you don't watch this while it's premiered, feel free to leave any questions in the comments below, any comments, anything like that. I read all of them. I may or may not get to it, especially if it's a really long-winded thing. But if you have video recommendations or, hey, you didn't really talk about this, you didn't really cover that, so could you make a video about that? I'll read it, and if there's enough content about it, I'll definitely make a video about it. So feel free to leave any comments below if you aren't here actually asking me questions. Also, like I said, I'm trying to make this as comprehensive as possible, but if I forget something, down in the description, I will create an add-on videos section where, I look back and I say, oh God, I completely forgot to talk about whatever. I'll make another video about it and I'll just put it down there. So check that. There may be videos there, there may not be, but just going forward, know that that will be down in the comments below. Also, a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about in this webinar or class, whatever you want to call this, I've already done other videos on, and so as I get to that section, look up above. Again, I'm not sure what side it's going to pop up from. You'll see the link to that video that goes into more depth. They're not crazy long videos. They're anywhere from 5 minutes to 15 minutes. Click on that link if you want to find out more about that and watch that video as well. Couple things. I've gotten some questions from people, and again, I'll do this real quick and then we're going to jump right in, asking me, why am I doing this? Why am I making these videos? Why am I taking the time? I don't know how long this video is going to end up being to go over all this kind of stuff. And the long story short is this is my attempt to give back to the fire service. When I first got into firefighting, I didn't know anybody. I didn't have any family members. I didn't have any friends that were firefighters. I knew nothing about it. And when I was going through doing ride time and in the fire academy and all that, I remember asking a few people when I would show up at these departments, hey, what can I expect in the interview? What's going on? And to put it in the nicest way possible, they were less than helpful. So this is my attempt at trying to give you as much information as you possibly can without having to pay somebody hundreds of dollars, because I also think that's equally as ridiculous that there's people out there that are charging you $2, $3, $4, $5, $1,000 just to find out about the interview. So what's going to be in this video and on this channel that's not in there, all the information you need is going to be on this channel somewhere, as far as how to prepare for the interview, what it's like to be a firefighter, all that kind of stuff. I'm sure they have a great insight, whoever these other people are, but don't feel like you need to spend a ton of money or have friends or family that are in the fire service in order to get good information. That said, these videos do take time. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I do use affiliate links, so if there's a product that I've personally used and that I recommend, I will never recommend products to you that I haven't actually put my hands on, and you like it and you think it would be useful. If you don't mind, use the affiliate link. It just gives me a small percentage back and helps out the channel going forward. So last thing, a couple seconds on who I am, because I've also gotten questions from people about that. My name is Mike. I am a full-time career firefighter and paramedic for a city just west of Cleveland, Ohio. and I am a columnist for Fire Rescue One. I've appeared on several podcasts for things related to firefighting and EMS, and I write and talk about firefighting for the newer generation of firefighters, the younger generation of firefighters, how to get into the fire service, what to expect when you're there, how to improve it, things like that. So that's just a little bit about me. This video isn't about me, this video is about you and the firefighter interview, so let's jump right into it. And before we go right into it, if you do find this helpful, please click the like button, click the subscribe button. It tells YouTube that you like this, it tells me that you find this stuff helpful, and we'll go from there. I made a PowerPoint for this video. At some point, I will try and upload the PowerPoint so that if you want to see the notes that I'm actually going off of, you can click on those and you can have those too, if that's something you find helpful. So what are we going to learn in this class? Everything about the interview, like I've already said. We're going to go over what to wear, how to prepare, what to expect when you're in there. If you've never had an interview, if you've never been in a fire service interview, if you've never been in a fire service interview before, they're a little different than your average job interview. Usually there's more than one person, and we'll go over all that kind of going forward. Questions you'll be asked in the interview. Now, it's impossible to know exactly what questions you'll be asked. Every department's different, every chief's different, every officer's different. But there are maybe about 10 or 12 questions that I can promise you will get either one or multiple of these questions at some point during the course of your interview. So we're going to go over each one of those questions, why they're asking it, and what are good answers for those questions. So we'll go over that, how to end the interview, what questions to ask, how to follow up, what to do if you don't get the job. This is a very competitive field, and if for some reason you don't get hired, which happens to a lot of people, that happens to most people at least once or maybe multiple times, you don't get hired, what do you do? How do you deal with that? And God, that's an entire video on itself. How do you deal with loss or frustration or setback? But just a couple things from my own experiences of things that you can do, things that you can keep in mind going forward, of how to deal with that loss or setback. So why is the firefighter interview important? I've had a couple people tell me that it's not as important as I make it sound, that maybe your fitness test is more important, or maybe your rank on the written test or your civil service test is more important. The firefighter interview, the interview process in general, is without a doubt the most important step of the hiring process for a few reasons. Number one, it's usually the department, whether it's officers or line guys, or maybe it's the mayor or city councilman, whoever's in there, it's their first impression of you. Now, maybe you're one of the fortunate people that has family members or friends on the department already, so you already kind of have an in, and that's great. But a lot of people watching this might not have that. And because of that, as of right now, until you go into that interview, you're just a name on a piece of paper. You're just a resume in front of them. As soon as they meet you, they can put a name to that face. And this is your first impression. Everybody knows first impressions are important, but nobody actually takes it that seriously. So take this seriously, because this is a first impression that you want to do right. Number two, the hiring process is subjective. Particularly with career departments, they try as hard as they can to make it as objective as they can. They make you take civil service tests, and then they rank you accordingly, and then you can only go, departments might have regulations as far as we can only go this far, we can only pick from this pool of 10 people, the top 10. You get ranked according to all these things and try and make it as objective as possible. At the end of the day, though, this is a subjective process. You could be number one on your fitness test. You could be number one on your written test. You can pass everything with flying colors. And if the chief and the officers of that department do not like you and do not think you would be an asset to their department, you're not getting hired. You can say that's unfair. You can say whatever you want, but that's the truth. You need to show yourself as a professional and in a way that you will be of value to them and their department going forward. If you can't do that, you're not getting hired. And then finally, a great interview puts you at the top of the list. Like I said before, right now you're just a name on a piece of paper. When you're the person that comes in, and we'll talk about the 3 keys to the interview, and that really sets yourself apart in a big way, Well, now everybody remembers that name. And so you might be number 8 on the list, but all of a sudden, if you come in and you smash this interview, now you're number 1. So doing this well and getting this right can put you to the top of a hiring list. So what are those 3 keys to the interview? Number 1, you have to be unique and memorable. So what does that mean? You have to be unique in the correct ways. You have to put yourself head and shoulders above of the rest of the competition, especially if you're trying to get onto a career department. This is competitive. Some tests have thousands of people taking the test to get hired at this department, whether it be police, fire, whatever. A lot of these public safety jobs will have thousands of people show up. Maybe you're going to a smaller department, smaller suburb, wherever, and maybe there's only 30 people or 40 people. That's still a lot of people. You are going to be competing against a lot of names. So you need to find some way in your interview to set yourself apart, to make you unique from everybody else. You also need to find a way to be memorable. You need to, whether it be by your actions or your words, and preferably both, do or say something that they remember. Now, it's important to not do something stupid. A lot of people think being unique and memorable means you need to be outlandish, and that's not what I mean. You need to find ways, and there's a video on this, to set yourself apart from the rest of the pack in a big way. Number 2, you have to present yourself in a clean-cut, professional manner. What does that mean? Well, we'll go over what you should be wearing when you're at the interview, but even if for some reason you're not wearing that, and I'll give you some recommendations, you have to be clean-cut. It means cut your hair. It means shave your beard. One of the best pieces of advice I got from a friend was never offend the sensibilities of a group that you're trying to join. If you're new to the fire service and you're trying to join the fire service, and everybody that you're sitting in front of is clean shaven with a tight haircut and they look good and they look professional and very clean cut, you probably should be too. Don't come in there with a beard and expect everybody to think like, oh, well, it's okay, he'll shave it later. Okay, don't offend the sensibilities of the group you're trying to join. So you need to look professional. And then finally, be confident. Now, I almost didn't want to put that in there, and I didn't want to say that because it sounds so cliche, and it's hard to come up with concrete things that I can say, do this and you'll be confident, because you might not be. But being confident isn't necessarily just how you feel, at least for the sake of this interview. Being confident is how you're projecting yourself. So inside, in your head, you might have butterflies, you might be nervous, you might be scared, you might be sweating, whatever. As long as you're presenting yourself as though you're confident in the things that you're saying and who you are, you're going to set yourself above other people. I've seen and heard other interviews. A lot of people don't do that very well. They stutter and stammer over their words. They can't get things right. They're fidgeting. They're moving around constantly. Something just as simple as sitting up straight with your shoulders back and your head held high. Now, I'm not talking about being arrogant or thinking you're better than everybody else, but just presenting yourself in a confident way will go miles, regardless of how nervous you are. So just keep that in mind as well going forward. So what to expect? Now, if you've never had a fire service interview before, like I said before, they're a little bit different. It's usually 3 to 5 officers is how it'll usually be a panel. Not all of them are like this, right? These are just guidelines. Usually the chief will be one of that panel. Captains, lieutenants, every once in a while, I've heard of departments bringing in line guys or just non-officers to sit in because that's going to be the people that you're going to be interacting with the most as soon as you get hired. I've also heard of people bringing in mayors. I've heard of people bringing in city council members. I've heard of people bringing in just normal everyday citizen who's involved in the community to come sit in. There's usually going to be a panel of people. So it will be a formal setting. The officers that will be interviewing you will almost always be in, at the very least, their Class B uniform, which if you aren't familiar with what a Class B uniform is, it's usually a button-up shirt with a tie. Class A uniforms, excuse me, are the ones with the jackets and the badge and the gold stripes and all that kind of stuff. I've been in interviews where they've worn Class A's. I've been in interviews where they've worn Class B's. Just depends on the department. Either way, it will be formal to a certain extent, almost always. What to expect as far as how you should address them. Address them by their title. If they're chief so-and-so, if they're assistant chief so-and-so, if they're captain so-and-so, if they're lieutenant so-and-so, address them by their title. And if you aren't familiar with them enough to know what their actual title is, call them sir or ma'am. That's always your fallback, but always stick with sir or ma'am. And then one other thing to expect, and nobody really talks about this very much, is in that panel, and this isn't always the case, you might have one, I call them the aggressive interviewer. Now, the aggressive interviewer obviously isn't somebody that's going to physically be aggressive with you, but they're going to be the person that's going to push you on every question that you ask. So let's say you talk about how, I used to work as a carpenter. Well, maybe one of those men or women on that panel used to be a carpenter, so they're going to start asking you questions about that. Well, tell me how you would do this, that, or the other thing. They're going to push you on whatever answer you give, and it's part of it. They want to see how you deal with that as stress. Now, that's not every single interview, but it's happened to me several times, and just know that that's something that might happen, which goes back to something else we'll talk about, is the importance of preparation. Make sure you're prepared, because if you do run into that aggressive interviewer, they're going to push you, and if you're not ready, you're going to stumble, and it's not going to look good. So, how to prepare, speaking of which. There's 4 good ways that I know of how to prepare. The very first and easiest is to write down your answers. If you go over to firefighternow.com, I'll put a link below, you can find a list of 51 different interview questions. Chances are you're not going to get all 51 interview questions, because that would be a very long interview. Take that list, and if you're serious about this, print it out, write them down, and write out your answers to each one of those questions. Now, you don't have to write them in essay form, but just write 2 or 3 bullet points for what your answers would be to each one of those questions. There's something about taking information out of your head and taking a pen and writing it down that cements it in your head. So that's the simplest and easiest way. Second easiest way is to just record yourself. Chances are, if you're watching this video, you have a computer or a smartphone or a tablet or something like that. The beauty of all these things is all these things can also be used as recording devices. Record yourself. Take that list from firefighternow.com that you just printed out or wrote down, set it out in front of yourself, ask yourself the question, and then answer it back with a recorder on. Now, when you record yourself, you're probably going to hate the sound of your voice. Get over it. Everybody hates the sound of their voice. You don't sound as bad as you think you do. But what you're going to want to listen for is, what I just did right there. You're going to want to listen for ums, stumbling, constantly repeating words, saying things that didn't really make any sense. And the more that you answer, the repetition of answering the same question again and again and again and again, you're going to notice that you're going to get a lot better as far as that repetition, those ums, those filler words, things like that. Number 3 is practice in the mirror. So we talked about being confident and the importance of that. This is why you want to sit down in front of a mirror and actually practice. And again, I'm going to warn you, I'm going to give you a heads up. This is going to be awkward. You're going to feel stupid doing it. Everybody does. Just do it. Get over it. If you're serious about this, you'll take the preparation serious, and you'll just get in there and get it done. Take that list of questions that you have, literally sit yourself down in a chair, hold up the questions, and ask yourself the question and look yourself in the eye as you respond. What you're looking for when you do this is, do you have any nervous tics? Do you kind of lean to the side? Do you get nervous and shuffle around? You don't need to be a robot, but at the same time, make sure that just watch yourself. See how you present yourself as you speak. That's really important. Again, because even if you're nervous, if you're presenting yourself and everybody's looking at you thinking, oh man, this guy's on point, it's going to go a long way in making you look confident. Now, another little tip that might be helpful is, because you're going to be in front of a panel, there's going to be multiple people that you'll speak to at a time. So when you're sitting in front of the mirror looking, don't just stare directly at yourself, right? That would be really awkward if every question you answered, you just stared directly at the chief. Look around to the left as though there's somebody sitting here, and then look to the right as you're still answering as though there's somebody sitting over here, and then come back to the middle, and then left and right. Look around, get comfortable with that so that you know what to expect, so that you're used to giving answers while looking around and not just locked in on one thing. And then finally, the fourth best way that I know of to prepare for this is to do a mock interview. These are this is by far the best. And bonus points to you if you have somebody that works in the fire service that's willing to do this with you and take the time and ask you questions and take this seriously, because they might have a little bit more insight into what chiefs or officers would be thinking when they ask these questions. But if you don't have anybody like that, that's fine. Try and find somebody that is in a position where they do have to hire people, in a position where they do interviews. Have them sit down with you. And the exact same thing like you did in the mirror. Instead of staring at yourself in the mirror, sit down with them, sit across from them, set up two other chairs across the other side of the table and answer questions looking to the side. If you don't have somebody that has interviewing experience as an interviewer or has hired people, that's okay. Just find anybody that will take this serious. The point is to get as many repetitions in as you can so that when the time comes and you're in there, you feel ready and prepared. So what to wear? I'm talking a lot, so I got to take a break. I got to get some water. If you've watched, excuse me, if you've watched any of the other videos on this channel, you've heard me talk a lot about the importance of how you present yourself and why that is so important, especially for these 10, 15, 20 minutes in the interview. The clothes you wear are an outward expression of how you feel about yourself, of how you see yourself fitting out in society, in the group, whatever. So showing up and wearing clothes that present yourself as a professional is really important. So to really shorten this, the best thing I can tell you is if you're going to a firefighter interview, wear a suit and a tie. Now, I've gotten a lot of pushback from people saying, well, I'm not really a suit kind of guy. I'm not really a tie kind of guy. I don't really care what kind of guy you are. It's not about you. It's about the group. If you're going to be showing up and everybody in the room is wearing a tie except for you, it will be noticed, okay? Wear a suit. If you don't have a suit, go buy a suit. Inevitably, you will wear it again at some point. You'll go to a wedding, you'll go to a funeral, you'll go to whatever. If you really are that against buying a suit, or maybe you're in a position where you can't afford to buy a suit or something like that, at the very least, wear a shirt and tie. I don't care if you don't like ties, wear one. Because when you join the fire service, you're going to get a set of Class Bs and Class As, and guess what everybody in Class Bs and Class As has? A tie. So get used to it. If you're a girl, full disclosure, I am not an expert with women's clothes. But a couple guidelines I would give a woman is if you're wearing a skirt, make sure it's at least knee length. A big mistake that you would make is if you come in there in something that is revealing or provocative or something like that, that will not be taken well. Make sure you wear navy, gray, and this goes for the guys' suits too. Navies, grays, those are all safe colors. Just very professional, very business professional. Let's just keep it there. Like I talked about before, guys, no facial hair, okay? You might have a mustache and you think it's cool and you think it's silly, and well, there's other firemen with mustache, shave it, okay? A lot of places with their fire academies are going to require that you are clean shaven from the start. Some places don't care. Once you get on the department and their guidelines allow for that, for you to have facial hair, maybe a little bit longer hair or whatever, that's fine. But in the meantime, like I said before, don't offend the sensibilities of the group you're trying to join. Chances are everybody that's going to be up there, maybe they'll have a mustache, but that's probably it. So be clean cut. Okay, so that's everything that I have in a nutshell as far as what to expect and how to prepare before this starts. Now we're going to go over, you sit down, what happens for these 20 minutes. And the best thing that I can give you guys is actual questions that you'll probably be asked and actual answers to those questions. So that's what this section is going to be. This section is going to be all about what's going on when you're there in the interview. And one of the things that I found helpful, at least this is how my brain works, and maybe this works for you too, is I like to categorize things. I break down all the questions you'll get into 4 different categories. I have who questions, what questions, why questions, and how questions. Now, who questions are questions that ask about you. Who are you? What's your story? What's your past? What past experiences have you had? They want to find out about who you are because, again, remember, like I talked about, as of right now, you're just a name on a list. They want to find out about you as an individual because they're going to be inviting you essentially into their extended family, into their group. And they want to make sure that whoever they invite to be in that group is somebody that would fit in with the culture of said group. What questions? What questions are questions that are directed at what kind of knowledge, skills, and experience you have? What are you bringing to the table? What stuff do you know about? And we'll touch on some of those here in a minute. Why questions? Pretty self-explanatory. They're asking about your why. The most common question, why do you want to be a firefighter, is a why question. Why are you here? What took you from maybe you had another career, maybe you're 18 years old right out of college. Why are you trying to jump into this so early? Those are good questions to ask when you're bringing somebody into your group. And then finally, how questions, and these are situational questions. You might not always get these, but these throw off a lot of people. Now, the situational questions, or the how questions, as I call them, are questions relating to how would you act in a given situation. If you're new to the fire service and you don't have any experience, these questions are probably going to center around some sort of moral or ethical dilemma that puts you in a situation where you can kind of see both sides. How would you go? How would you react? If you have a lot of experience in the fire service and you've been in for 5, 10, 15, 20 years and you're making a lateral transfer or whatever, they might center more on actual tactics. Tactics being something like you just pulled up to a 2-story residential home. What do? You pull your first line, where does it go? Things like that. They'll give you a scenario and you have to go through and you have to answer based on the experience that you have. Like I said, though, if you're new to the fire service, they're probably not going to answer that. They don't expect you to know that right off the bat. They want to find out kind of how would you act in one of these moral or ethical situations. So, first question, tell us about yourself. Well, it's not actually a question, it's more of a statement. Tell us about yourself is probably the most common opening to every interview ever. And there's several reasons that they'll start out with this question. The first is they want to know what you think is important about you. So if they ask you to tell us about yourself, what are you going to tell them? What's important enough for you to talk about in these 30 seconds, minute, 2 minutes that you have to answer this question? What are those important things? They want to know what those are to you. It also gives them more questions to ask. I know at the very beginning of this, I talked about how you might have the aggressive interviewer. Well, they might not necessarily be aggressive, but if you're sitting there and you, let's say in your answer of tell us about yourself, you say, hey, I used to work as a carpenter. And like I said before, somebody else on the panel used to do that as well. And they say, oh, really? Where'd you work? Who'd you work for? Things like that. It gives them more questions to ask to just find out a little bit more about you. So tell them about yourself is just kind of an open invitation for you to start talking, and they might pick questions out of there. And then third, it's just an easy question to open up with, right? This is already kind of a stiff format, a stiff scenario going into an interview. It could be a little tense. Hey, Mike, or I'll use myself. Hey, Mike, nice to meet you. Tell me about yourself. What are you about? Okay, so how do you answer it? The easiest way I like to think about answering this question is if you've ever watched an NFL game or a baseball game or a basketball game or whatever, soccer game, and they go to halftime, what do they do before they cut to the commercials? They have maybe a 10, 20, 30-second highlight reel of all the major plays and all the big things that happened in the first half or whatever. Think of your life like that. If you're in your mid-20s, think back to maybe about high school when you left high school. If you're in your 30s, think about your adult life after high school. And pick out 2 or 3 major events. Things like your education, things like your relevant job experience. Maybe you were in the military, something like that. Talk about those 2 or 3 things. Now, I will warn you not to get really, really wordy about stuff. Don't drone on and on. This question should be able to be answered in 30 seconds, at most a minute. If you start going 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes and you're still telling this big long story about your life, nobody cares that much, okay? It's just an opening question. They want to know what the highlights are and they want to move on. So that is just a quick primer on tell us about yourself. Next most common question, and I can almost guarantee you will get this at some point in your interviews, is why do you want to be a firefighter? So they are asking you this question to assess a couple things. They're trying to figure out what are your motivations and why are you there? Are you there for the right reasons? Which, by the way, there are no right reasons. What brought you there? What are you doing here? Things like that. That's why they're asking this question. So this is a really, really important question, though, because answering this question correctly can set you up for success for the rest of the interview. So how are you supposed to answer? You heard me talk before about being unique and memorable. In this question, this is your prime opportunity to be unique and memorable. The reason being, almost every single person that has come through that interview has said the exact same thing to this question, which is, I'm here because I want to help my community. I'm here because I want to give back to my community. I'm here because I like to help people. I'm here because, right? Those are all the exact same answers. And that is the most cliche and generic answer ever. And it's not necessarily a bad answer. It might be 100% true. And that's good because you're going to have to help people. But every single person that comes through there says the same thing. And put yourself in the position of an interviewer. If you're interviewing 30 people, or hell, not even 30 people. If you're interviewing 10 people that day and you're on interview number 8 and you ask this question, why do you want to be a firefighter? And the 8th guy or the 8th girl in a row comes in and says, I want to give back to the community. Well, okay, yeah, you and literally everybody else on this list. This is your opportunity to be unique and memorable. And this is an easy way to do it. So how do you do that? Connect your answer to a life experience that you had. So I'll give you an example. I knew a guy who, when he was a teenager, his father passed away of cancer. And he told me the story about when he was a teenager, his dad was on at-home hospice, and they called 911 because it was going to be about that time. And the firefighters, wherever he lived at that time, they had firefighters and paramedics. They showed up, and he said they were so nice and careful and cared so much for his dad. And he was just stunned and shocked that these complete strangers, people that he didn't even know, in the middle of the night, treated his dad like that was their own father. And after he saw that, he knew for himself, that's a group I want to be a part of. And that's why I want to be a firefighter, because I want to be able at some point in the future to do that for somebody else. What an awesome answer that is. That's an awesome answer for several reasons. Number one, unfortunately, so many people's lives have been touched by cancer, either personally or they know somebody, family member, friend, whatever, that has been touched by cancer. So almost everybody out there can relate to the experience of seeing somebody suffer from cancer, number one. Number two, you're connecting it to a story about how great the fire service is, and this one instance is what made you want to be one of those people. What an awesome way. I mean, my father passed away from cancer, so if I was interviewing him and he told me that story, he might not be a good candidate for other reasons. That wouldn't be the reason he would get hired, but I would remember that person. I would not forget that person's name, and if I saw his name on a list, I would remember, oh, that's that guy. So what an easy way to make yourself stand out. But maybe you're one of those people that don't have some dramatic, life-altering moment where you decide, hey, I want to be a firefighter. Maybe you have a series of events or you connect the dots differently. So I'll give you an example of my answer. Before I got into firefighting, I was a soccer player. Growing up, all I wanted to do was be a professional athlete. I wanted to be a professional soccer player. Played through college, played a couple years in the pros, got hurt, and that was the end of it. And when I got asked this question, why do you want to be a firefighter? You did something totally different. The truth is when I stopped playing soccer, I was trying to find something that was as much related as what I realized is I didn't enjoy necessarily playing the game of soccer as much as I enjoyed being a part of a team and working towards something. And the most similar thing I could think of at the time to being on a sports team was the military or fire service or any sort of public safety. So that's why I wanted to be a firefighter. That's what brought me into it. But growing up, I didn't know anybody, and I never, as a kid, I didn't watch firefighting movies. That wasn't me. I came into this later in life. So the moral of the story is, though, connect whatever experiences you have in your life to why you want to be a firefighter and turn that into your answer. And that is the best way to make yourself stand out for this question. Next question. What is your biggest strength and weakness? Again, really common question. I can almost guarantee you will get this at some point. Why are they asking you this? They're assessing your confidence and your humility. Are you going to be a person that can well, not stand, but sit in front of them and say, I'm a good candidate and these are my strengths as a person? Or are you going to be the person that kind of sheepishly shrugs your shoulders through it? Also, they want to assess, are you humble? Do you think you're the greatest thing ever? Or do you actually have enough humility to realize that you're a person and you have weaknesses too? The other reason they're asking this is they want to know how honest you're going to be. Nobody likes to talk about weaknesses. Nobody likes to admit that they have weaknesses. I get it. I don't, you don't. We all have weaknesses. I have weaknesses. You have weaknesses. Are you going to give them a real answer, or are you going to give them some nonsensical sort of like, well, I'm just such a perfectionist. I try so hard at everything. Okay, right. That's literally what everybody else says. Don't say that, okay? Give them some sort of legitimate, real weakness, but make it vague. What do I mean by that? The best way I can explain that is through my own answer as well. When I got asked this question, the answer that I gave is that I had struggled with organization, and that's true. I do things very old school. I don't actually have it here in the room with me right now, but I have a on paper day planner. I've tried all of the apps. I've tried all of those types of things, and they just don't work as well for me as in the night before I physically have to write out what I have to get done. Organization was something that I struggled with. So I do it old school, and it's a lot slower. It takes more time. It's not as sleek in whatever as having everything planned out on your phone. But that works for me. And so that's a good answer for two reasons. Number one, most people can struggle with organization. If you have even a semi-busy life, there's a lot going on. It's tough to stay organized. But number two, giving that answer and explaining that that's why I do things as far as organization by physically writing things down is that shows that I'm taking action to address the weakness. So whatever weakness that you give, make sure you address that, because action is going to be king. Talk about what you've done and how you've battled to overcome whatever that weakness is. Now, again, like I've talked about before, everybody has weaknesses, but if you have some sort of major character flaw or you're struggling with some sort of major issue, this is not the place to bring that up. Mental health issues, alcoholism, depression, things like that. Definitely, those are important things. I'm not even saying that those are weaknesses. What I am saying is don't bring those types of things up if they ask for a weakness or something like that. Get those things addressed in your own time. They're looking for things that are going to be truthful, but also not really in depth. You don't need to bare your soul to these people. Strengths, same sort of thing though. Talk about something that you embody as a strength and make it something that is tangibly an asset to that department. So maybe you have a lot of leadership experience. Talk about that. The fire service is always looking for more good leaders. And make sure you bring up an example and talk about how you actually embody whatever that skill is, leadership. I have a lot of leadership experience, and this is a strength of mine, and here's some examples of times that I took a leadership role. Perfect answer, strengths and weaknesses. What would you contribute to this department? Also, very, very common question, because they want to know that if they bring you into their group and they hire you, you are going to be an asset. So, why are they asking this? They want to know if you possess the knowledge and skills that that particular department is looking for. Most departments are looking for certain types of people or certain skills. Let me give you a really generic example. One of the guys I work with he knows everything that you could possibly know about trucks and cars. It's insane. He's a mechanic. When the day comes that this guy retires, they would be keenly interested in someone that had mechanic type experience. Now, that doesn't mean they're only going to hire somebody with a mechanic background, but if somebody says like, hey, here's some knowledge, here's what I would add to the department. I worked as a mechanic for 10 years. That guy's going to stand out. Now, there's no way for you to know what this exact department is looking for, but generally, there's going to be a set of skills or knowledge that they would prefer over just generic. Sometimes it's just they're looking for somebody with a lot of fire experience. Other times they're looking for people without fire experience. Just depends. So, what would you contribute to this department? You're going to want to highlight your strengths, skills, experience, and knowledge. What things do you know? What certifications do you have? What training have you gone through? What life experience? Maybe you have a ton of EMS experience. Maybe you have a ton of fire experience. Maybe you have a ton of rescue experience, dive experience if you're in an area that has a dive team, things like that. It's important though, whatever you say that you would contribute, make sure you can tie it back to that actual department. Again, here's another example. Where I work, we're right up on the lake. We're on Lake Erie. We're right up on the lake, and we have a dive team. If you have dive experience, bring that up because that's an asset to the department that you are actually applying to. So tie it to that department and it'll make you look a lot better. So what are some potential strengths or things that fire departments would be looking for? Well, I have a list here. Mechanical skills, like I talked about, the guy that I work with, that's the mechanic. Those trucks and those cars break all the time. There's always something going on, flat tires, oil changes, light issues, lights burning out. It's just constantly something. So instead of having to ship the truck off constantly every time something goes wrong, he fixes some of the stuff in-house. Talk about mechanical skills if you have them. Building and construction skills. You've heard me use the example of a carpenter several times. If you understand building construction, you are an asset on the fire ground. Guys that have trades backgrounds, those are really, really, really good knowledge and skills to bring to a fire department. IT and computer skills. As the fire service progresses, we're going to get more and more into we're going to get more technologically advanced. Computer dispatch systems, reporting software, GPS systems, phone systems. I mean, hell, where I work, our schedule is all on an app. Like everything is done through that. So if you have some sort of IT skills or knowledge, talk about those because inevitably those will be needed at some point. If you're bilingual, if you live in a very like ethnically diverse area where there's a large segment of the population that speaks something other than English, talk about that. Now, what I will warn you is if you took Spanish 5 years ago and that's all you know, you are not bilingual. Okay, you have to be able to carry on a conversation with somebody that is an ethnic speaker of whatever that particular language is. So if you're going to say you're bilingual, again, make sure you're actually bilingual because if somebody on that panel speaks that language and calls you out on it and you don't know what they just said, you are going to look like an idiot. So bilingual, it's a great asset to have depending on where you live. You can talk about formal education. Now, formal education is kind of a double-edged sword. Most formal education, quite honestly, doesn't matter. If I'm an expert in art history, zero fire departments care what I know about art history. They just don't care. But there are certain types of formal education that could be helpful. If you have a nursing degree, talk about that. Fire service is moving more towards EMS. If you're an electrical engineer or mechanical engineer or something like that, talk about that. If you're a physician's assistant, right? That's more academic experience or formal education. But I work with a guy that's a physician's assistant as well. So yeah, talk about any formal education that is actually relevant to the fire service, though. Don't tell them about your art history degree because nobody cares. And then finally, public speaking. Now, this one might be a little bit, the other ones I've talked about are better, but public speaking is something that is an underrated skill in the fire service. What do I mean by that? A large part of the fire department's role is public education. You go out in the community, you do CPR, you do school talks, you do community fire academies. There's so many different things that the fire departments and for the fire service in general does for the community. They need a liaison to be the person to go out there and represent the department well. If you really want to see a firehouse kitchen table scatter, let the officer come in and say, "Hey, we're doing school talks today. Who wants to volunteer to go talk to the first graders?" Nobody wants to do that. So if you're that guy that enjoys going and doing school talks and public events and things like that, just say, "Hey, I've experienced doing this and this is something that I enjoy." Fire departments need that person. So talk about how you could be that person. Next, why do you want to work for this fire department? This is a question that I got, in every interview that I did. Why are they asking you this? They're asking this because what do you know about that particular department? And will you give a genuine answer, or will you give some sort of nonsense? So they want to know that you are potentially as invested and interested in them as they are invested and interested in you. And that's a fair thing to ask, because if you get hired by a department, they're going to be spending a ton of money to bring you on. They're going to be spending a lot of time and a lot of energy on you. They're making a big investment on you. So they want to know if you actually want to be there, or if they're just another department on your list of departments to apply to. You're just trying to get in. And that's not a bad thing if that's what you're trying to do either, by the way. So how do you answer this question? Well, number one is you have to be honest and genuine. And number two is you want to look for a connection to the city. There's a guy I went to fire school with who he currently works for the city that he was born and raised in. So that's an easy one for that guy, right? Why do you want to work for this fire department? Well, because I grew up here, I went to school over there, and I lived on that street until I was 10, and then I moved to that street until I was an adult, right? That's an easy, I'm a hometown boy. Easy answer. But what about the rest of us that work in areas or live in areas that we didn't necessarily grow up? Find a connection to that city. So what about that city or that department is attractive to you? For example, when I got hired at the department I work for currently, two things. The first department I got hired at, I went to high school in that particular city. I went to a private school. So I went to a school that was in the city that I used to work for. So that was my connection to the city. I kind of grew up here from 7th grade till 12th grade. This is where I spent a large majority of my childhood. So I know the city very well, and I'm invested in the city. Okay, good answer. The city I work for now, I think I had only ever been to maybe 2 or 3 times in my entire life. So how do you answer that? Well, where I got hired, one of my instructors in the fire academy was an officer where I work. And so I said, honestly, the reason I want to work here is because I've been so impressed. And this was a true answer. This wasn't me sucking up. I was so impressed by him in the fire academy. Long story short, our fire academy split every group into platoons. And for your entire duration of the academy, you would be in your platoon. I don't remember. I think it was in platoon 8 or 7. I don't remember. It doesn't matter. The point is he was in charge of my platoon. So I got to know him very well. And he was a very impressive guy to me. That was my answer. I met him in the fire academy. He was very impressive. And if this is a place where he's in charge, this is a place where I want to work. Sounds kind of like a suck up answer, and I'll admit it sounds like it, but it was a true answer. So that was my connection. So why do you want to work for this fire department? Look for a connection, look for an honest, genuine reason as to why that department stands out to you and why you'd be interested in being there. Sorry, I'm still talking a lot, so I'm going to need some more water here in a second. And then we're going to get into some situational questions. All right. First situational question. Would you ever refuse an order? Why are they asking you this? They're asking you this is they want to know if you can think and problem solve for yourself, or if you're a mindless robot that's just going to do whatever anybody else says without thinking. The short answer to this is yes, you should refuse an answer, but only under very specific circumstances. If it's an obvious threat to life safety, you should refuse that order. So that question throws a lot of people off because they don't want to say that in an interview because they don't want the panel to think that they're going to be a problem candidate, a problem new guy, anything like that. But when you're on an actual fire scene, the commanding officer, whoever's running that scene, only has so much of a view of what's going on. So if you're in the back of a building and you can see something that's going on that person might not know about, they have to rely on you. So even though they gave you an order to go in and do whatever, if you can tell this place is about to fall down in a few seconds, refuse that order. Don't go in. Don't put yourself or someone else in a place where they're going to die. You should be refusing that order. Obviously, that's a very slim, strict circumstance, but you might get this question, and that should be your answer. Otherwise, of course, you're not going to refuse an order. You're relying on the experience of these other people. They know a lot more than you know, so no, don't refuse any other orders. But that would be the correct answer to that situational question. Next situational question. How would you react if you saw a coworker steal? Well, they're asking this question of you because they're trying to test your character. They're also trying to find out if you'll do the right thing or if you're going to cover for a friend. Because think about the situation that this would put you in. You're the new guy or you're the new girl on the department. Being a new person is always awkward and it's uncomfortable. You don't want to do anything that gets everybody else mad. But here again, we're talking about a social, or I'm sorry, not a social, like an ethical or moral dilemma that you're going to find yourself in. What do you do? The answer is 3 steps. Number one, you'd speak to the coworker in private because let's say you just finish up at a fire scene and you're doing overhaul on a house and you see somebody go into the drawer, in the bedroom drawer, and steal cash or jewelry or whatever. That's a common scenario that they'll give you. Maybe the homeowner who's standing out in the front yard that just watched their house burned up asked him to go get that and bring it out to them. You don't know that, right? You only saw this little bit. So step one is you would say, if I saw a coworker steal, given whatever the situation was, the first thing I would do is I would confront that coworker in private. I'd say, hey, I saw this. What was that about? And ask them to do the right thing, because, like I said, you don't want to come flying at people when you don't know what the full situation was. Ask them to do the right thing. Hey, I saw that. Was that for them? Did you give that to them? And if they say, oh no, I just needed some extra cash, tell them to do the right thing. Return that money. Return that jewelry. Whatever it is. If they can't do that, then you need to report that to your officer. And that's the true thing that you should do. As a firefighter, people are going to inherently have a lot of trust in you, and they are going to expect you to do the right thing. You are going to be walking into people's very personal, private lives. You're going to be in people's homes in very vulnerable situations. And if you can't be trusted, you have no business being a firefighter. You have no business working in public safety. So that's the answer to that is yes, you would report them, but you would also do it properly. Nobody's looking to hire a tattletale of every little thing they come running to their officer to report, but you also want to make sure that you do the right thing because it will reflect poorly on you, it will reflect poorly on your crew, your department, and the fire service as a whole. So that's how you answer that question. What are the daily responsibilities of a firefighter? Right? That's again another very common question. That's something that gets brought up quite a bit. There's the old joke that firefighters nap all day and they just kind of sit around and eat and occasionally work out and things like that. And some days that does happen, let's be honest, depending on where you work. Some days could be slower than others. But they want to know if you understand what's involved in just the daily operations of a fire department. So in case you are that new that you're not sure, here's some good things to answer with. You respond to emergencies. That's what you're there for. You train. That includes working out. That includes actual training evolutions, hose evolutions, ladder evolutions, all that kind of stuff. Maybe your department does EMS as well. We do EMS where I work, and so we do a lot of paramedic and EMS training. Vehicle maintenance. Again, these things break constantly, so they need to be maintained. Truck checks are done every single morning. Fire prevention, maybe that's you, maybe your department or wherever you're applying to has somebody that's dedicated fire inspectors. They go on the inspections, they handle all that. Other departments split them up amongst the line guys, and they have to go do the inspections. But fire prevention is a big aspect of the fire service. Education, personal and public. Maybe people come in for CPR, maybe people come in for Community Fire Academy, maybe you're going and doing school talks, maybe you're where I work, they do this thing with Santa every year where Santa shows up to the event down on the lake on the fire truck. So we have to drive him down there. Well, that's a public appearance. So we do a lot of that kind of stuff as well. Inspections, I already talked about that. Public services, we do smoke detector battery changes, car seat installations, and people drop off fire extinguishers to us all the time. It's just a general public service. That's just some of the many things that happen in the day-to-day operations of a fire department, things that you will be expected to do, things that you will be expected to know how to do and know about. So just write some of those down and write some of those down and take that going forward. What is the primary role of the fire department? This is a really simple, short answer: to protect life and safety. That is the number one reason that firefighters and fire departments exist. That is your job. Anything else, like that big long list I gave you of things that fire departments do, all that stuff's good. All that stuff's important, but your number one priority is to protect life and provide safety. That's it. What have you done to prepare for this job? So I talked earlier, the other day I heard the interview that was going on over the phone, and this is one of the questions they asked. And I have to say, the guy that answered it botched it real bad. So if you are that guy, listen here. So they're asking you this because they want to know if you've taken this job and this process seriously. I can't tell you how many EMT and paramedic students come in and do ride time with us that haven't gone through fire school yet and just think like, oh, I'm just going to show up and take a test and I'm going to be on a fire department. And they don't take the process seriously. They don't take the job seriously at all. They want to know what you've done to prepare. So what are some things that you've done? Think about that. What certifications have you done? Did you pay your own way to go through fire school? That's something you've done. Did you go to paramedic school? Did you go to EMT school? Did you get a fire science degree? What other certifications did you take? Did you take any other fire science classes? Do you have your BLS certification, your ACLS certification? What kind of things did you do to prepare for your written test? Did you study? What type of If you're watching this, guess what you're doing? You're preparing for the job. Now, you don't have to say, hey, I watched the one video on YouTube from Firefighter Now. You don't have to necessarily say that, but you did a lot of practice and preparation leading up to that. What type of physical training have you done? Even something as simple as sitting down and asking a firefighter to go have coffee with you to just find out why they got into the fire service, what the job's like, what they don't like, all those types of things. Just talking to other people in the fire service is a form of preparing. Now, granted, it's going to be a weaker form, but that counts. Have you done voluntary ride time with that department or any other department? Talk about that. EMS experience, volunteer experience. Literally think back to everything that you have done leading up to then, that you have done in preparation to become a firefighter, and talk about those things. Again, this doesn't need to be a super long answer. You don't need to go on forever about it, but these are just easy guidelines and things that you can touch on when you're asked, what have you done to prepare for the job? So those are just the main questions I wanted to go over. That's the end of the middle section. I'm looking at the timer right now, and I'm almost an hour in, and I can't believe how long this video is going. So for the rest of this, it's going to be, how do you end the interview? What do you do going forward? The interview's over. Usually what will happen is the officers or whoever's interviewing you will say something along the lines of, well, this is all the questions we have for you. Do you have any questions for us? Before I get into that, I need to take another drink of water because I haven't talked this long for an hour straight in a really long time. So, actually, before I go into the questions, most places will ask you that. If you're interviewing somewhere and they don't ask you if you have any questions, don't start volunteering them, okay? If they ask you that at the end of the interview, it's usually a good idea to have one or two questions. And this is an actual video that I've done, so make sure, and I'm sure you've seen them popping up throughout the course of this video, but make sure you look up here for the link to the video that I go more into how to end an interview properly. You are going to want to ask questions. Now, in that video that popped up, wherever that is, I give you actual questions that you can ask. Whatever questions you ask, you want to make sure they're the right questions. You don't want to ask silly things like, well, what's the starting salary? Or things that you should already know, like, well, how big is this city? Like, that's easy. You can easily find that in a quick Google search. If you don't know those things going in and you ask a question like that at the end, it will reflect poorly on you. So click wherever that link was and watch that to find out what the actual, example questions that I give you to ask. As far as you ending the interview, I've had people ask me, do I need to have a closing statement? Yes and no. You don't need this big long ballad of well, it's been a pleasure, and I this and I that, and I look forward to just a very concise one sentence. Thank you all for the opportunity to interview with you today. I look forward to hearing from you in the future. Something along those lines, short, to the point. Make sure you're looking people in the eye. Stand up and shake people's hands. Be professional about it. Now I know, well, so this is another thing. At the time I'm making this video, people are still a little iffy about shaking hands. Let's touch on that. If it's obvious that they don't want to shake hands with you in the sense of they put themselves behind plexiglass or something like that, don't offer to shake people's hands. But if it isn't obvious, offer to shake their hand. That's still our custom in our society. Whether you like it or not, whether you think it's good or not, or bad or not, there's a lot of people that don't care that will still shake your hand. If you're that concerned about it, go wash your hands later. Now, I'm not telling you to break any protocols or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is if you're really unsure, just ask. It's awkward for everybody right now, this whole I'm not sure whether I should or shouldn't shake hands. Say, is anybody opposed to shaking hands, or is everybody okay with shaking hands? And just offer. Because the reason I say that is because if the person interviewing you is expecting you to shake hands and they're okay with shaking hands and you don't, or you don't at least offer, it might be taken poorly. It's the only reason I'm saying that. So if you're really uncomfortable with shake hands, don't do it. But that would be my recommendation to you. Finally, rules for following up. So the interview's done. You asked your couple questions. You watched in the other video, I gave you those questions. It's all over. What do you do? How long do you wait? How do you follow up? When do you follow up? All that kind of stuff. Okay. Give it at least 2 weeks. Government agencies, municipalities, districts are notorious for moving at a snail's pace. This process might go very slowly. You might finish your interview and you might not get hired for another 3 or 4 months. Don't be surprised if that happens. This process takes a long time. Does it need to take a long time? I don't know. Maybe. Just depends. So give it 2 weeks. If you haven't heard anything in 2 weeks, what I would recommend is that you call the station. And usually every fire department has a secretary or like an office managerial type of person that sits at the front and answers the phone. Introduce yourself. Hello, I'm Mike. I interviewed 2 weeks ago. I was just calling to follow up and see if there's any word or if there's anything else I need to provide to all of you. That person will either know or say, no, we're good. We'll get back to you when we get back to you. They might be useful, or they might give you useful information and say something like, well, we're not letting anybody know. It'll probably be about another month till we're done with the rest of the interviews, because who knows how many people they're going to be interviewing. Or they might just tell you, oh yeah, no, sorry, we forgot all about that. But give it 2 weeks before you call and do that. Now, you might be one of those people that gets the city sends you something in writing. Maybe they'll tell you, oh no, we sent out the letters tomorrow, so it should be here in a few days. Whatever it is, give it 2 weeks. Do not get an attitude with that person on the phone. It's very frustrating when you put in a lot of time and effort and work and you're forced to wait. Do not get an attitude with that person though. It is not their fault. They have no part of that. But if you do get an attitude with them, they will remember who you are and they will pass that information along. Be nice, be respectful. So, okay, 2 weeks out. If you go another 2 to 3 weeks, I would probably recommend 2.5 to 3 weeks, and you still haven't heard anything, then give another call. Because right now we're over a month out from your interview. Give them a call again. Say the same thing. Hi, I'm Mike. I called before. I was calling again just to follow up and see if there was any progress on that. And at this point, if they're really dragging their feet, they might say, hey, we're not going to have an answer for another month or 2, so don't bother calling back. And then just do what they say. But that's honestly the process. There's nothing really crazy to this. Give it a couple weeks. Every 2 to 3 weeks thereafter, follow up. They'll tell you eventually. They will tell you if you don't get the job, right? They're not just going to leave you hanging, or at least they shouldn't. And yeah, just go from there. So finally, what do you do if you don't get the job? So, like I said at the very beginning of this video, this is something most people will experience at some point. Chances are you are not going to be hired at the very first place you ever apply to and ever interview at, and then it's the place you want to stay for the rest of your career. That's pretty rare. It might happen to you. I don't know. I hope it does. But for most people, that's not the case. And so the way that departments will usually let you know is they'll do one of two things. They'll either send you a letter in the mail, or maybe if they do things electronically now, that it's I call it a no thank you letter. It just essentially says, thank you for your time. We've decided to move forward with other candidates, and then that's your answer. Or somebody will physically call you and say, hey, thanks for coming out. Thanks for doing all this. We decided to go with another candidate, blah, 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 and they'll go from there. When you get those letters or those phone calls, that sucks. I have gotten those letters and phone calls before, and it really bums you out, especially when you put in so much time and effort. So a couple things that I can tell you is the best advice I could give you, and again, maybe I'll make another video on this of how to deal with setbacks and things like that. Excuse me. You're going to be frustrated and you're going to be upset. Do not take it personal, okay? Departments are looking for specific people, and again, this whole process is subjective. You might objectively be a better candidate. You might have more certifications. You might have more experience. It's nothing personal against you. Nobody's out to get you. Quite honestly, nobody really cares, how you feel about this. So don't take it personally. If you do take it personally, it's going to start to warp you. You will become miserable. You will become vindictive. You will become angry. And you will inevitably, as time goes on, and that keeps happening, you will inevitably turn into, and I don't remember what video it was, I talked about there's this subculture in fire and EMS of people that tested and tried for so long to try and get into the fire service, and they didn't. And so now they crap on everybody else's dreams and desires to want to get into career firefighting. And they're, oh, the system's rigged. You have to know somebody, you have to be friends with somebody. That is not true. Do not become one of those people. Those people that do those things are the same people that got turned down by department after department after department after department, who are now just miserable, vindictive, angry. It's not me, it's them. Don't do that. And that's really hard to do. So give yourself a day or two to be upset, to be angry. That's totally fine. That's totally normal. But the best thing I can tell you to do after that 1 or 2 day max period of being really upset is try as hard as you can to reflect back on what you can do better. That's the mature thing to do. That's the mature response. And maybe you did great. Maybe it was just a matter of, you're a great candidate and you're awesome. We just thought this guy was better. Or this girl was better. There's no real reason. You didn't do anything wrong. You weren't lacking anything. We just thought this person was a better fit for our department. That happens. But try and reflect on yourself, and try and reflect on your preparation, how you carried yourself, and try and improve on those things that you know. Like if you ask yourself that question honestly of like, what could I do better? Everybody has an answer in the back of their mind. So ask yourself that question. And it's a tough question to ask, right? And these are lessons that go beyond firefighting. And again, that's a whole different, hell, there's books written on this. It's a whole different topic for a whole nother time, but that's what I would highly recommend that you try to do. And then number 3, try again. Keep going. I can't tell you how many people I have met and gotten emails from and gotten letters from and gotten comments from and messages from that have said, I have tried for years to get hired and finally it happened. What an awesome story. And that can be you. This job is not just for certain chosen people. You can do this. You can work your way into the fire service, but you have to keep trying, and it's going to be frustrating and it's going to be difficult, but keep going. So at this point, I'm 1 hour and 10 minutes into this. My voice is going, If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you find this useful. If you do, please share this video with whoever. Sorry if it was a little long-winded for you. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys in the next video.